The Church of St. Augustine had stood in the center of a small town in Georgia for over 200 years. The majestic building, with its massive wooden doors and stained glass windows, was the pride of the local community, who gathered there every Sunday to pray together. Today, more people had gathered than usual. The reason for this was an unexpected guest, the legendary actor Morgan Freeman. He had been invited by his longtime friend, Pastor Henry Collins, to deliver a brief speech about the importance of unity and understanding between people of different cultures and beliefs. However, Freeman had no idea that his appearance would mark the beginning of a conflict that would divide the community. Freeman arrived at the church 20 minutes before the service was set to begin. Dressed in a dark suit, he looked elegant yet modest. Pastor Collins met him at the entrance and warmly shook his hand. "Thank you for coming, Morgan," he smiled sincerely. "It's an honor to have you speak." "The honor is mine, Henry," the actor replied in his signature deep voice. "I'm always ready to support a good cause." They walked into the church's inner courtyard, where parishioners had already begun to gather. People recognized Freeman, whispered among themselves, and some even dared to ask for an autograph. Morgan smiled, greeted everyone, and didn't refuse anyone. But suddenly, a man in a sharp suit approached them, clearly different from the others. It was Jonathan Williams, the church's elder, known for his principles and uncompromising stance on matters of faith. "Mr. Freeman," he said coldly, scrutinizing the actor from head to toe, "you are in a special role today, and I believe it would be appropriate for you to wear this." He extended a small silver cross on a thin chain to Morgan. There was a pause. The nearby parishioners held their breath. Freeman looked at the cross, then at Jonathan. "Is this mandatory?" he asked, his voice laced with doubt. "In our church, everyone who stands before the congregation must wear a symbol of faith," Williams replied, without blinking. Pastor Collins, who had been standing nearby, became worried. "Jonathan Morgan is our guest, and we invited him not to change his beliefs," he said. "This isn't about beliefs, Pastor," Williams interrupted him. "It's about respect for our community." Freeman sighed, feeling the tension rise. He had nothing against religious symbols, but forcing someone to wear them seemed wrong to him. He looked around at the people. Some avoided his gaze, some nodded approvingly at Williams, while others clearly waited to see how the situation would unfold. "Jonathan, I came here with respect, but I do not wear religious symbols that are not part of my personal choice," Freeman replied calmly but firmly. "Then perhaps you shouldn't speak before our congregation," Williams said coldly. There were surprised gasps from the crowd. Pastor Collins turned pale. Freeman remained unfazed. He knew this moment would be decisive. "If that is your decision, then I accept it," he said, turning toward the doors. And at that very moment, the situation escalated. "Wait," a voice rang out from the crowd. Morgan had already taken a step toward the exit, but stopped. He didn't need to look back to feel the wave of tension ripple through the room. He understood the moment. This wasn't just about him. It was about what was happening inside this community. Sarah Miller, an elderly woman in a neat beige suit, walked to the front of the hall. She was one of the oldest parishioners, having attended St. Augustine's church since her youth. "I'm listening, Mrs. Miller," Morgan said, turning toward her. The woman briefly glanced at Jonathan Williams, then back at Freeman. "I've been coming here for over 60 years. My husband was baptized here. My children were baptized here. I've seen this community change." She paused, scanning the people in the room. "And today, I see something I don't like." Whispers spread through the crowd. "What do you mean, Mrs. Miller?" Pastor Collins asked. She nodded toward Morgan. "This person came here as our guest. He came with respect, not to impose anything, but to speak about unity. And here we stand, forcing him to do something he doesn't believe is right for himself. Is that what Jesus taught us?" A hush fell over the room. Jonathan Williams frowned. "Mrs. Miller, we just want to adhere to tradition." "Adhere to tradition?" she interrupted. "Or perhaps show someone that they're an outsider here?" Morgan watched in silence. He wasn't new to such situations. He had spent his life going through similar trials, but this time he felt something different. This wasn't just about race or religion in its purest form. This was about change, something some people feared, while others already felt it was inevitable. "Let me say something," Freeman finally spoke. Everyone turned to him. "I respect this church, this community. That's why I'm here. I know that to you, this cross is a symbol of faith, and to many, it holds great significance. But to me, respect for the individual has always been more important than symbols. I'm not rejecting it out of disrespect, but because true faith should never be forced." He paused, then added, "If I'm required to wear this cross to speak with you, it means my words don't matter to you for their own sake." The people paused to think. Williams, however, didn't back down. "This isn't about you, Mr. Freeman. It's about the community, and if you won't accept its rules." "Then what is the meaning of your faith, Jonathan?" Pastor Collins interrupted sharply. Everyone turned to him in surprise. "I ask, what is the meaning of our faith?" he repeated. "Is it about loving our neighbor or about forcing others to look the way we think is right?" Williams clenched his lips, but remained silent. "Friends, I invited Mr. Freeman not to change our traditions. I invited him because his voice matters. And if we're not willing to listen to someone who's different from us, maybe the problem isn't with him, but with us." The room fell silent once again. Morgan barely smiled. "So what's it going to be?" he asked. "Can I speak?" This time, Williams said nothing, but Sarah Miller clapped loudly. Others followed suit. Then more joined in. Morgan Freeman nodded. He knew this was only a small step. But it was from steps like these that change begins. As the applause gradually faded, Morgan felt his heart beat a little more calmly. He wasn't sure if this was a victory or just a step toward saying what he felt, but one thing was clear: change had begun. And that was important. "Your story," Morgan continued, turning back to the assembly, "is not the only one in this country. I know that for many of you, this cross is important. For me, this is not a question of faith. I respect each of you who carries this faith, who truly believes in this community. But I cannot pretend to be someone else in order to be accepted. My faith, like yours, is based on the principles of respect and love. If we cannot share this respect unconditionally, then where do we stand?" The room fell silent. People listened. And although it seemed that most of them were not ready to change their beliefs right away, it was hard not to feel that something was changing in the atmosphere. This was a moment when Morgan hadn't just won an argument. He had given people something more, a sense that perhaps they were right in their aspirations, but the way they expressed them needed rethinking. Pastor Collins looked at Freeman. He wasn't sure how to respond. It was a difficult moment, and he knew this wasn't just about the cross. It was about who had the right to decide what was right. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pastor said, "I must acknowledge that I respect each person's opinion. But we must remember that our traditions are what bind us together. They give us a sense of community. Are we ready to abandon our principles so that everyone feels comfortable?" Morgan looked at him and calmly responded, "I'm not asking you to abandon your principles, Pastor. I'm just calling for greater understanding. Principles can be maintained, but we need to find ways to make sure those principles don't become barriers to those who think differently." Williams, who had been standing aside, was clearly displeased, but he dared not intervene. Those who supported Morgan began to look at him differently. This man, whom they had considered merely a guest speaker, had become a symbol of strength through calmness, courage, and dedication to his beliefs. At that moment, Sarah Miller approached Morgan. She was less certain than when she first spoke before the crowd, but her eyes shone with kindness and gratitude. "You've made us think," she said, quietly, almost whispering. "And I believe this is right. We need to listen to each other more, not just insist on our own way. It's not easy, but maybe we need to learn to change." Morgan smiled, and it was not just a polite smile. It was the smile of someone who understood that change is always difficult, but it is inevitable. "Thank you, Sarah. If I've helped even one of you understand what's more important than tradition, then I'm already happy to have been here." People began to approach him, exchanging looks that seemed to say more than words. In that moment, they no longer saw him as just a celebrity. They saw a man who could speak from the heart and be sincere. Soon, the doors of the church opened, and one of the local young men appeared in the doorway. He resembled those who sometimes feel alienated from institutions that are based on old principles. But this young man, clearly trying to find his place in the world, approached Morgan and said, "You're right. I can't make myself believe that everyone should do this, or that because of tradition. We can have our beliefs, but that doesn't mean we should insist that everyone act according to our standards." Morgan nodded and placed his hand on his shoulder. "Understood," he said. "This isn't just about one issue. It's about changing approaches so we become more open to those around us. It's important to hear, not just listen." And so they stood, trying to understand one another, and between them, there was no longer the wall of misunderstanding that had been there before. But this was just the beginning. He left the church, and outside, a journalist from the local newspaper approached him. "Mr. Freeman," she asked, "what do you think about what happened today? What does it mean to you?" Morgan paused for a moment. "It's not over yet," he said. "Change begins with small steps, sometimes with simple dialogue. What we did here today is just the beginning. And if it makes even one of us think about what's more important than anything, it's humanity, then that's already a great victory." She nodded and thanked him for his response. Morgan walked away, and although the day had been difficult, he felt that he had taken an important step, not only for himself, but for others who might find meaning and peace in it. But the future still remained open, and how it would unfold depended on everyone who was willing to move forward. The next few weeks after that meeting at the church felt strange to Morgan. If someone had told him that his words had such weight, he would have laughed. He was an actor, not a preacher. But what had happened in that little church meant more than just another performance for an audience. It was the moment when people started to listen, and that was more important than any contract or award. Morgan was driving home after the interview with the journalist when his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, an unknown number. He answered, trying not to show impatience. "Hello. Mr. Freeman? This is Mark. We met at that meeting in the church. I just wanted to thank you for your words. They really made me think about a lot of things. My family, we've always stuck to our traditions, and I admit I didn't always understand people who had different views. But your speech changed my attitude. You're right, it's not just about traditions. It's about people." Morgan listened, unsure of how to respond. His voice was calm when he said, "I'm glad my words could help you. But, to be honest, I don't have all the answers. I just want us to listen to each other more." That's true. But I think it's not only about listening, it's about acting too. If we all were willing to take small steps toward change, maybe this world would be different. I want to help you with that. Morgan thought for a moment. This was the first person who truly took his words not just as something to think about, but as an invitation to action. If more people who had been at that meeting felt the same desire for change, maybe everything could change. "That's an interesting idea," Morgan said, smiling slightly. "We need to do more than just talk." Mark continued, "I think it can be done through small initiatives. For example, I want to suggest gathering a group of people and having something like a shared meal or gathering, where we can talk about different views without conflict. It won't be mandatory for anyone, but it will show people that we can coexist even if we don't always agree. Morgan considered this idea. It could really be the start of something bigger. The idea of bringing people together and giving them space for dialogue. It could be that small step toward the change he had talked about in the church. He wasn't sure if it would work, but he felt it was worth trying. That's a great idea, Mark. I'm with you. If you'd like, I can help with organizing or at least be there. That would be amazing, Mark replied, his voice full of enthusiasm. We can involve people from different communities, and this could change how we see each other. After the conversation, Morgan sat in his car, looking out the window. He thought about what Mark had said. This was more than just a speech at church or an interview with a journalist. It was an opportunity to change something deep, something that could change how people viewed each other. A few days passed, and Morgan met with Mark. They discussed the details of the gathering. They decided not to turn it into a political or religious debate. Their goal was to create a space for people with different views to understand each other, without trying to change anyone's mind. It was a simple idea, just to listen. And so, a few weeks later, the first such gathering took place in a small park. Morgan arrived with Mark. People began to arrive, different people, with different views and beliefs. Older people who had grown up with traditions, younger people searching for new paths, and those in between trying to find balance. They didn't immediately talk about politics or religion. They just sat together and shared their life stories, their worries, their hopes for the future. And even though deep down they still held their beliefs, it was different. They saw people they could talk to without fear of judgment. When the gathering ended, Mark approached Morgan. It was incredible, he said. People really started to open up, even if they were skeptical at first. Morgan smiled, feeling that this was not just a small step, but the beginning of something bigger. Yes, but remember, we're just getting started. We need to keep going. People have to be ready to change their views if we want to achieve something important. Mark nodded, and they walked off together, knowing that this was just the beginning of a big change. The months following that gathering passed quickly, and with each one, these meetings grew larger. The idea that once seemed simple and even naive began to bear real fruit. People from different perspectives, cultures, and social groups started coming together, leaving their political and religious beliefs out of the discussion. They simply shared experiences, listened to each other, found common ground, and even began collaborating on local initiatives. And it was amazing. Morgan couldn't help but notice how this initiative had changed his own attitude towards many things. He had once believed that change could only come through large political or social movements, but now he understood that change begins with small steps, just listening and being open to new ideas. After one of these gatherings, when people were starting to leave, Mark approached Morgan. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about you. All of this happened because of you. And not just because of your words in the church, but because of your willingness to be part of this process. You're not just an actor on stage, you're a real leader. And that's a big achievement." Morgan smiled, but his smile was bittersweet. He didn't feel like a leader. He was just someone who had the opportunity to say a few important words, and that had caught people's attention. "I just showed that we can be there for each other," he said. "Change doesn't come quickly, but if we don't start, nothing will change." And he was right. Gradually, the number of people who wanted to be part of these gatherings grew. It was no longer just a meeting to discuss ideas. It had become a place where people found common solutions to real problems. Whether it was helping elderly people with their daily tasks or organizing volunteer initiatives for poor families, these were concrete actions, not just empty words. Morgan knew that these changes wouldn't change the world overnight, but it was a real beginning. the beginning of a new era of understanding and helping one another. And perhaps this is what real change looks like. Not through loud campaigns, not through political promises, but through simple yet important steps taken by people who are not afraid to be open and ready to compromise. A few months later, Morgan received an invitation to participate in a television talk show that brought together various public figures and thought leaders. And when it was his turn to speak, he realized he no longer needed to prove anything. His goal was not to gain popularity or recognition, but for everyone who was listening to understand. Change starts with us. This is not about politics, he said, looking into the cameras. It's about people, and we can make this world better if we are willing to listen to each other and act. Not big words, but small deeds. That evening was important for him. He didn't become a hero, and he didn't receive any awards for his actions. But he felt that he had done something real. He returned home with a sense of peace, knowing that his role in the life of this world had not been in vain. Morgan Freeman wasn't a leader in the traditional sense of the word, but he became a symbol of how change is possible when people open their hearts and listen to one another. And that was the greatest achievement of his life.